As the final hours of Donald Trump's 48-hour ultimatum ticks away, the war with Iran is inching towards a point of no return. Washington has warned that if Tehran does not fully reopen the Strait of Hormuz, US forces will obliterate Iran's power plants, starting with the biggest one first. A threat that goes far beyond the limited strikes which we have seen so far. And Iran, for its part, has answered with open defiance, vowing to hit US-linked energy and desalination facilities across the region and even to completely close Hormuz if its own infrastructure is attacked. Now, caught at the center of this showdown is Kharg Island, a tiny coral outcrop that quietly handles about 90% of Iran's crude exports and has long been seen by strategists as country's single greatest vulnerability. Till now, US claims they have already destroyed military targets on Kharg Island while sparing its vast oil terminal, but pressure is building inside the Trump administration to go a step further. In fact, US Treasury Secretary Scott Bessent openly talks of escalating to de-escalate and says all options are on the table for this very island, including sending in American troops. And if that happens, it would not just be another air raid or naval clash. US boots on Iranian soil, even on this small, heavily fortified island, would mark a sharp turn in this very conflict, raising the risk of a much wider war and testing how far both sides are willing to go in this dangerous game of chicken over the world's energy lifeline. Also remember, thousands of US Marines and sailors have already been surged into this very region aboard the USS Tripoli and other vessels, giving Washington a ready boots-on-ground option if the White House chooses to use it. So today in this edition of From the News Desk, we will talk about two things. First, why Kharg Island is so important for Iran, and second, what US boots on Kharg Island would actually mean. As I mentioned, Kharg Island is a small, heavily fortified island in the northern Gulf, roughly 25 kilometers off Iran's coast near the city of Bushehr. Now, despite its modest size, it is the backbone of Iran's oil economy. Various estimates say around 80 to 90% of the country's crude exports flow through its storage tanks and deep water terminals before heading mainly to the Asian buyers. Now, because Kharg Island sits in naturally deep water, the world's largest tankers can dock directly there, and Iran has spent decades building pipelines and storage with the capacity in the tens of millions of barrels. Well, this particular thing makes the island both a strategic asset and a single point of failure. And if Kharg is seized or badly damaged, Iran's main revenue lifeline would be choked overnight. Now, US strikes have already hit military targets on this very island while largely sparing the core oil facilities, signaling that Washington sees Kharg as a tool of leverage rather than just another target. In fact, multiple reports from Western media outlets says that the Trump administration is actively weighing options to occupy or blockade the island to force Tehran to reopen Strait of Hormuz. Now, into this debate stepped US Treasury Secretary Scott Bessent, who has become one of the most vocal defenders of Trump's hardline approach. Asked whether American troops could be sent to Kharg Island, he said all options are on the table and argued that sometimes you have to escalate to de-escalate, while backing Trump's 48-hour ultimatum. Well, any move to put US Marines on Kharg would be clear escalation. In fact, military analysts warn that the island lies within range of Iranian missiles, rockets and drones, meaning any landing force would be operating in a small, exposed area under constant threat. Now, even supporters of a tougher line admit that seizing Kharg might not force Iran to surrender and could instead push Tehran to hit other shipping lanes or Gulf facilities. Now, politically, US boots on ground in Iranian territory would cross a line that Trump has so far tried to avoid, shifting Washington from high-intensity air and naval strikes to direct territorial control. In fact, some hawks in the US Congress argue that securing an offshore oil terminal like Kharg should not count as full-scale ground war. But many lawmakers and US allies fear it would open the doors to a longer, bloodier conflict. Well, for now, the deployment remains a possibility, not a declared plan. But if the 48-hour deadline passes with Iran still defiant and Hormuz still largely closed, the question of whether US troops sent onto Kharg's shore could decide how far and how fast the wider war spirals.